Today we'll talk about the COCO dataset. We're going to look at what the dataset is first, then we'll look at the structure of annotations before going through an example of how to visualize all bounding box annotations for a given image. COCO stands for Common Objects in Context, and one motivation of COCO is that the previous datasets for object detection contained images of objects mostly in isolation, and these objects were shown predominantly from certain angles only. And this leads to poor generalization when the detection models are used in real-world applications where the objects are seen in their natural scenes. Let's look at an example. So here on the left side, we, for example, can see the toothbrush or this controller, and they're both shown against a uniform background and from like this top view angle. And here on the right side, we can see the objects being used. So for example, the toothbrush, this person is using the toothbrush to, well, brush the teeth, and we can see that the object is partially occluded. And the same goes for the controller here. To find common objects, the authors went through multiple steps, including asking 4 to 8-year-old children to name objects they recognize in controlled environments. And the results are 91 categories, as we can see here in figure A. And what we can also see is that each category has about 10,000 annotations. And what we can see in figure B is that COCO, compared to other datasets, has on average more images with more than one category. So the bulk here is at 2. And what we can also see is that the dataset Sun has even more categories per image on average. But when we look at figure D, we can see that Sun, while it has more categories than COCO, COCO has about 2 orders of magnitude more instances per category. And this makes sense when we think about this focus on the context, where COCO aims to show objects in their natural surroundings, so in their context. And in case you're wondering what these 91 categories are, here they are shown represented by icons. And we can also see that these categories are grouped by 11 supercategories up here. And now that we've seen that, we will in the next step go into the annotation file and extract all annotations given a specific image. But before we begin, we have to download the annotations and the images if we haven't done so. So we go here to the COCO Dataset website, and we go to Dataset, Download. And what we want to do is want to use the 2017 data. So we go to 2017 train val annotations and download it. And then we also download the train images and the 2017 validation images. And that's in total about 20 gigabytes in size. And then when we've done that, we look at the structure that we want to have. So we want to have the annotations here in a folder. Then we have a folder images, and in this folder we have the train images and the validation images. And then we can use the JSON library to explore the annotation files. And I'm going to load the validation annotations because the file is just smaller, but the training annotations have the same structure. And then we can look at the top level keys. So this is a dictionary, so keys. And we can see these 5 keys. So info contains information about the dataset, and licenses contains a list of licenses under which the images are used. When we look at categories, we see a list of category objects. And if we just look at one, let's say the last one, we see that there's this super category we've seen earlier. There's an ID and there's a name. And we're going to use this ID and this name later to map the category ID to the category name. Then the image key contains a list of image objects. And when we look at the object, we see the image ID. And the image ID also shows up in the file name. And that's a way to identify an image. And then finally, under the annotations key, we have a list of annotations objects. And we also look at the first one. And what we can see here is that we have a category ID. So the category ID is what we've seen earlier. And we can use the category key to map from this category ID to the category name. Now this ID here is the annotation ID. That's a way to uniquely identify the annotation in the dataset. And then we have the image ID here, and that's what we've seen earlier. And this is how we can map an annotation to an image. And what's also important here for our bounding box annotations is actually the coordinates for the bounding box. And I'm not seeing it. Oh, there you go. So these are the 4 coordinates for the bounding boxes. Okay, so now that we've seen the structure of the COCO dataset annotations, let's use this knowledge to show all bounding box annotations and their labels given an image. So the first thing we'll do is we'll need some imports. And what's going on here is we're going to use matplotlib to display the image and especially show the label names and the bounding box annotations. So this is here for the bounding boxes, and we'll need some default dictionaries to handle the annotations. So next, we just display an image. So this is an image I selected randomly, basically, from the file. Actually, not totally at random. I think the scene is pretty cool, and we will see why soon. But basically what we can see here already is that the origin of the plot is in the top left corner. And that's going to be interesting when we want to plot the bounding box. So the first thing we'll do is we'll do this first mapping. We're going to map the image IDs to annotation objects, which can be accomplished with this code. So here I'm reading the annotation file in. Then I have this annotation file object as I had in the previous section. And here I'm basically mapping all image IDs to the annotation objects. So let's do it. And then the second part, so the mapping of category IDs to category name, is simply this. And with these 2 dictionaries, we can now plot the annotations along with their label names given an image. So let's do this. First, I'm gonna get an image name, and what I'm doing here is I'm extracting the image ID from the image name, which is this latter part. And the image ID is here used as an integer. So that's what's going on here. So this is our dictionary that we created above, and this returns us a list of annotation objects given an image ID. And now to get all annotations for a given image, we can just iterate over it like so. So what we're doing here is we're extracting the bounding box, and the bounding box is in the format x coordinate, y coordinate, height, and width. And the origin is in the top left corner. And that's the same thing as it is for matplotlib pyplot. So that's great. We don't have to do any transformations here. And then we take the second mapping we created, category ID to name, because in the annotation, we have a category ID, and we extract the label name here. And the way we plot the bounding box and the label is like this. And finally, we show the result. And there you go. So as we can see, we have now the bounding boxes along with the label names displayed. And so why I chose this image is it's an interesting side note, because you can see this massive annotation here of traffic lights, which is like, I don't know what's going on there. There are multiple traffic lights. They should be labeled individually like they are here. And actually this one is already labeled, but now this annotation labels like all of these traffic lights again together. And that's just a nice example of mistakes in labeling, and labeling can be really hard. And if you want to learn more about the mislabeled traffic lights, we have a nice blog post, which I'll link in the description, about this topic. And this is how I use the COCO dataset. I hope you find this video useful, and if you have any questions or comments, please let me know. See you in the next one.